thank you very much. Even though I'm sure we're all getting hungry, I could stay in this panel for another hour or more because it's so interesting. And there's so much to unpack, but I will be quick, just make a few remarks. I liked very much the discussion, and I think this is a beautiful discussion where there's more to me, like imagination and consciousness, and also how literature can function as a technology, and the role of this utopia, the utility of utopia in the city. And I won't make a direct question, but those are points that really stick to me now. But I have a question more directly to Sandra. And you mentioned I think more directly the example of a girl who lives in a favela and doesn't want to go to Recreio, Barra da Tijuca, some upper class space in Rio. And I was thinking, or middle class. And I was thinking about other movements as well when people from the peripheries of cities in Brazil occupied shopping malls, and connecting also with Caldeira's presentation, but this is another presentation, when she talked about these rolezinhos, and there is always this issue of when, this division between class, they create more resistance or this resignation, and people just avoid or confront.
Yes, I think this is exactly the most central question. How do you move from the subjective experience of that young girl and her initial attempts to understand herself in relation to other people who are going to be absolutely determinant for her developing sense of identity and who she is, with strategies being built in her community to get out and explore precisely those aspects of herself that she cannot see yet, but which are there. And that's why I think we need to have, and that's my plea in a way, and that's what we try to bring with a psychosocial approach, that there is a mind space in the city that cannot be out of the debate, because ultimately you need individuals who are able to understand themselves as agents and who can then produce the kind of collective agency that we have observed in organizations such as Apareg or Kufa, or as Teresa described in her work. What is the rolezinho in Rio? What does it take for a boy from a favela or for a bunch of black boys from the favelas to go to a shopping center in Ipanema and start to display the way they do music, their bodies, their existence? Just occupying that space is an act of resistance, rebellion, and at the same time, a disruption of the geography of the city and of the psychology of the city. Because I have heard, in Brazil we have been experiencing tremendous processes of social change. But if you walk into a upper middle class of town, any town, I'm thinking of Porto Alegre, I'm thinking of Rio, I'm thinking of São Paulo, you're going to hear people saying, well, now that everyone can come into the shopping center, as pessoas is the expression, which we the persons don't have anything to shop. Or, the way the middle classes, the upper classes have felt disruption because of the occupation of rolezinho or just the lifting of people out of poverty. So I see that there is a deep connection between the voices of young favela children who are in the process of defining who they are and what they want to be, and those experiences of agency that have actually sprung from the favelas in the form of these organizations that are actually struggling right now in Brazil to be sustainable, but which represent a move towards a new form of activism that is proud not only of its own capabilities at community level, but it's very determined to state who they are and what is the identity they want as opposed to the identity they are given by others in the wider public sphere. So that is the process, I think, that we need to problematize. How do you move from her voice to a collective voice of empowerment and transformation that will feed back into her own individual pathway as she grows up and as she develops as a citizen of the city, as they said to it. You know, I want to be a citizen of Rio de Janeiro. And I heard from many people in the favelas, I don't want to speak favelês, I want to speak Portuguese. I want to speak Portuguese, you know, which rhymes in a nice way.
Oh, interesting.
So, I guess my question is for Sandra, and it kind of extends from what you just said. What came to mind during your presentation was the gang leader who kidnapped the nurses to make sure that people in the favela would get shots for yellow fever. And I'm thinking about borders, thinking about this young girl thinking that she can't leave, but now there's this person who is kind of in an empowering way, like we are going to bring the resources that we do not have access to, right? But then does that then thicken those borders in the mind? Does it enforce that, or does it say that we have power even though we're in the favela and we leave, we can still bring those resources back? I'm just curious what that did to the imagination of a youth, in your opinion.
I think that's a very good question. Is the problem are the limits of this kind of intervention, and I think we are in Rio, in a way, we're starting to experiencing and witness the limits of you can't stay only at the level of the bottom up. You know, one of the interesting things I observed in Brazil, or since 2009, 2008, when I started to work there, were the level of partnerships that were being established between the state, NGOs, social movements, not least because if you want to get into a favela, as you saw, for us to get into Brigada Geral, you need to negotiate entrance with the narco gangs. The state needs the same thing, so you need to find strategies, and you need to partner effectively with marginalized populations to get in the most basic health services, such as yellow fever shots. So, you know, you need those levels of informality, but I am convinced that ultimately we will need to bring institutionality to favela territories, and how this is going to be done is a problem I leave to my urbanist colleagues, because you know, the complexity is so huge and there are so many dangers involved in that interaction that I don't even like to think of when it comes to subaltern dispossessed peoples, and how, you know, I was very struck this morning when Teresa mentioned that, you know, we're moving from possession of land to rental of land that is being actually acquired by militias, by illegal organizations in São Paulo. To my knowledge, this is not happening as yet in the prime areas of Rio, Rocinha and Cantagalo, which are right in the middle of town and have the best views of the city. But I shrink just to think what is going to happen when real estate developers discover that the best views to have in Rio are actually if you go up to Cantagalo, you know, and why should those populations be leaving there? So I would, you know, your question is incredibly difficult one to answer. And I think that at the moment, most of these communities, what they have is this guy who goes and kidnaps a nurse, and that's why so many of the drug organizations that operate in favelas can stay in that territory. Because as Feijão in the film you saw when Washington Ribas, who is Feijão, the guy who is an activist in the favela, said, in the favela I learn my values and my known values. Mm-hmm. Because he says, when you talk to him, you know, when I was growing up, the guys who did the good in my community were the narco-traffic bosses. And he became one, because that's what he wanted to be. You know, it took him a whole different set of experiences to change his mind and to change his life trajectory, which he did. And today he's an activist working and making sure that other kids don't experience what he did. But, you know, you need to have the kidnapping of the nurse, because when you need the yellow shots, you need the yellow shots. In communities, humans will act when they have to. But that's not a sustainable solution for favela territories. We need to act and change that.
have a final question behind.
Yeah, just, I'm sorry, it's back in on Brazil, but could, could you just tell me a bit about which side of the border Capoeira is on? I don't know much about it, but I've heard of it.
Well, capoeira is everywhere in Brazil. It's a form of martial art that came to Brazil with the black populations that were transported to the country by slavery. And it's in the favelas, capoeira, the beat of the drums, what favela dwellers and we Brazilians call a batida, the specific beat that communities have. So it's the music, it's the beat, it's the dance. Capoeira is a form of dance, it's a very dance-like, swingy-like. So this is all part of the African matrix of Brazilian culture, absolutely central for favela communities in relation to the imagination, because they rely on the imagination to survive. You know, the imagination is a major asset of these communities, and it's expressed in everyday life in the telling of stories, which go back to a mixture of the quilombos, of the old stories of Brazilian survival and struggle, of black survival and struggle in Brazil, but also to experiences such as, you know, Martin Luther King and other figures of the black movement. So capoeira is in and out, as most things in Brazil, but it's very much as Brazilian popular music, something that comes from the hill. It's part of the culture of the hill, cultura do morro. And it comes down to the asphalt, because in cities it's cool, because, you know, young people love it and they want to do it. It's very popular in Europe as well.
Thank you. Let me go back to the question of ferocity, not only in Rio or São Paulo, but maybe in literature or in other cities. I think that one of the main imaginaries about the modern city is that it pours, right? So that's is the idea that if you're in a modern city, you can walk around, you can be anonymous, you can go everywhere, and you can, and that's the definition of it. You know, there's that famous article by Iris Marion Young in which she thinks about democracy by thinking about what is to circulate in a big city. So if porosity is what defines the city, why, so isn't your problem not porosity, but exactly its opposite? So it's not that, the problem is that you create those zones of no pass, and that those zones basically fragment and destroy the modern city. And so that's the issue is not to think of porosity, but exactly of the opposite. So the problem is not porosity, the problem is the opposite. The problem is that it was destroyed.
Thank you, all three of you, for your wonderful papers. I think the urban imaginary is in great hands. I wanted to say a thing about Twitter and a thing about novels, because I love both. Jill, as you were speaking, I tweeted Shannon Matten. I just said that you were talking about Soja to Shannon Matten, and she liked it straight away. So I felt all excited about the incipient feminist critique of the smart city, and that's my question about that. So we had a very robust critique of the smart city from Eric in a previous session. Do you, like Shannon Matten and others, do you see that as an overtly feminist project? Is there a what's the gender dimension in the smart city? If that's okay. And the other one, I love novels so much, and novels about place, that I'm just reflecting on the fact that I can't quite remember the places that I've been and the places I haven't at this point. So, that period where there was all the wonderful Indian novels, Rohingya mystery and all those, and I studied South Asian literature as an undergraduate, and I can't remember if I've been or not, and I wondered about that as a sense of an imaginary. And then also the sense that you never go fresh to places because of the intertext, structured around your idea about, say, the Prague novels and even Klima, and how far place in that sense is the city a text or is it an intertext, I guess, was what I was wondering.
Thank you. So I think everybody was provoked, so we can pass the microphone and answer for a pamphlet. I don't know who wants to go first.
Thank you for the question. So I'll start with the smart city of it. So is there a feminist critique of the smart city? Well, you bet. And Shannon Matter, Naomi Datin, and there are a number of that work is beginning to emerge, to be intersectional critiques as well. I mean, certainly in the UK, with the emphasis, I mean, this comes back to the question about porosity, because one of the few things that every risky comment, every city, almost every smart city focuses on. There's a lot of diversity within that label, but transport and smooth, flowing, problem-free, automatic, sometimes green transport is absolutely what defines a smart city, and one of the aims of the smart city. So when you look at all the promotional videos, one of the problems that's pictured is people waiting. So I'm not sure whether porosity flow actually we can say one is good and one is bad. I think it depends very much on context actually. But certainly it seems to me that transport is focused very much, that flow is focused very much on time-saving efficiencies, and with particular gender divisions of labour, that's a particular masculinist view of I think what the city is. So driverless cars, they're never pictured. I mean, my ideal driverless car would be one that pulls up outside a supermarket when you've got 10 bags of shopping and a toddler and a screaming baby, and it will just open the door, open magically, and a whiskey home. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Strangely, that is not what they pictured. They're smart people in suits reading The Economist while they're sitting in their automatic versions of their already car. It's very, so there are all sorts of gendered priorities. Partly because the IT sector in the UK at least is very male dominated. That's not true elsewhere. India, for example, I think there are more women in the IT sector, so that might well be emerged differently. But one thing, maybe this is to segue into something around literature, so I think there are some other registers of critique though as well. What I didn't say was that I think if we're trying to think about imaginations as being mediated through technologies of many kinds, I think we might also think about some technologies having their own imaginations and speculative fiction in terms of distributing agency across all sorts of bodies and agencies and relations and multiplications. And that was the thing I loved about hearing Teresa's lecture this morning. My particular citation was Anne Leckie, who's a speculative fiction writer. She has a book where you realise about 3 chapters in that the narrator is not human as we recognise it. It's absolutely brilliant revelation, and it helped me think differently about the digital. Not just in terms of gender, but about multiple subjectivities more generally having to be rethought.
Maybe just a response on gender too, actually. That maybe I'm just sort of saying the same thing, but it has always struck me that urban porosity is always, by definition, a masculine porosity. I mean that the movement of a human being that through city space is depends on that person being safe, and not being threatened. It depends on daylight. For a woman, it depends absolutely on daylight. And what is so interesting, for example, about many other examples about the Arundhati Roy, is that her key characters are either transvestites or women, and they negotiate city space differently. So what literature also allowed us to do, I think, is it's the representational thing. Absolutely, I've had that experience. I'm sure everyone else has, of going to New York for the first time and thinking, I've been here before. But what literature also does is not only speculative fiction, actually, although that does a very important thing, but it's that way in which Roy in this novel opens up tiny, confined, polluted, restrictive areas of the city, and gives them a crowded, a teeming, a very vital life force simply by imagining through her writing different ways of being in those spaces, and that's what I find particularly exciting about this work. It has to kind of operate together with, of course, because the novel is such a kind of a bourgeois genre. It has to operate with other kinds of art forms like dance, like music. But I think it because it's a technology of the imagination, it works in particularly interesting ways.
Well, so I agree that to address Teresa's point, I agree that the fundamental imagination and perhaps reality underpinning the city is the idea of porosity, of encounters, of, I think that you could put the young girls presenting to you here at one side of the extreme and the flaneur or the flaneuse at the other side. Because the experience of walking the city, of navigating the city, we all know that pleasure, we all experience that pleasure, and we all know as well that in some towns, you don't go to certain places. You have to be very careful. There is a tacit knowledge, there is a representation of certain areas of London, for instance, where I know I should go, I should not go. There are postcode gang wars. In some cities of the world, I think this is so acute and so extreme that to restate the problem of porosity today is almost a political act that we need to engage in, because although our imagination builds cities to be porous and to enable us to communicate and build our lives together, today they are so divided and they are so inhabited by territories of poverty, exclusion, and marginalization that many of the citizens are completely excluded from that experience of being in the city. So for many of the people in Vigário Geral, life is confined to Vigário Geral. They have never been to the beach. They have never been to Ipanema, for instance, or to Copacabana. They have never experienced the sea, and they live in Rio. So that's why I think, yes, I think the problem is back in the agenda, and it will be in the agenda as long as we have the city of walls that you so aptly described.
Thank you very much. This was an amazing panel.